Joe, it's being reported that there have been discussions in the SEC in reference to now finally going to a 9-game schedule. Now, there's been apparently conversations, at least what I read from the article that you had sent me, and what had been discussed last week in the SEC meetings, that there would be potential revenue sharing in reference to there being a 9th game. Your thoughts on the SEC potentially finally going to a 9-game schedule?
So first of all, before we start yelling at each other, I am not saying this coming from the side that I think that the SEC doesn't play a tough schedule. I'm not saying that. I'm also not saying that they don't have a difficult non-conference for most of the programs. That's not the case, because you do get to see LSU playing UCLA and USC, which are maybe not the most elite programs in the country, particularly UCLA, but it's still a nationally recognized brand. You see Alabama playing and going to Wisconsin. Texas plays Michigan. There's a lot of intention to play difficult, well-known national brands by the SEC's top teams.
Mm-hmm.
What was brought up in the article, and I think what's going to be the real driving force for this, why it goes to 9 games, is because of the settlement, the house case settlement that we spent time talking about last week. That goes through. There's now a commitment to $30 million that needs to be put forth for these schools to give to their rosters, and then also to give back pay to some of these athletes. There's a lot of money that's going to need to come up from somewhere, and I don't think the SEC is not necessarily hurting to need to do this, but it would benefit them to have that 9th game and to get more confirmed money from ESPN for their rights deal.
All right. It doesn't bother me either which way what they do. Let me just say what has been. I'm not saying this is my argument. Let me tell you what's been the argument. Kentucky plays, Louisville every year, which they have been told that they need to schedule somebody again in the beginning of the year too, but they're playing somebody at the end. So they are playing non-Power 5 teams, okay? Secondly, so does Georgia, so does South Carolina, so do other. Now you get to a place where, there are other teams that do that. I don't think that it is an issue with some of the bigger teams that are in the conference. I think the issue has become is the teams that are not of the caliber of LSU, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, etc. Okay, that's what I think that this is coming down to. And I don't think additional revenue, I don't think those programs care about additional revenue. If you're telling me, like hypothetically, if you're South Carolina and you have a 10-game run where you have Power 5 opponents, I understand where they're coming from because of the central fact their schedule, the schedule that they're playing is not like anybody else's in the country. Joe, we have talked about brutal schedules so far. Who have the two most brutal schedules in the country? Both of them are in the SEC in an 8-game schedule, right? We've talked about Oklahoma just now, and we've talked about Florida. Well, that's an 8-game schedule. So let me just throw, what the counteract has been. Could you imagine Florida having to play Alabama in the mix of all their schedule that they have this year? And the question becomes, is it created equally? Now, what I would tell you is, and you're going to hate me saying this, if you're going to do that in the SEC, you cannot come to me about records being different and teams that are 9-3 in the SEC versus a 10-2 Big Ten team. Because when you start getting there, it's not created equally, right? Meaning there are opponents in the Big Ten that legitimately have a stretch of Iowa, Indiana, Northwestern, and Maryland. Oh, wait, that's just Michigan. So if there's a scenario where Michigan is 10-2, and let's just say Oklahoma is 9-3 this year, who went through the tougher beat to get to where they are? So if you go to a 9-game schedule, revenue or non-revenue, the argument is always going to continue to be made that there is somebody facing a more brutal schedule. Now, let me say this before you go.
Okay.
You know what's going to come of this, right?
What?
The SEC is going to go to 9 games, and a 9-3 team is going to get in over a 10-2 Big Ten team, and they're going to expand.
Wait, who's going to expand the playoffs?
I think the playoff will expand because, again, you're going to have to justify to me that, like, okay, just don't freak out when I say this. If Florida goes 9-3, if they're not going to, but if Florida goes 9-3 this year, when they've played 11 Power 5 opponents, with that brutal ass schedule, I don't give two shits who is 10-2 in any other conference. They deserve to be in over anybody else after going 9-3 in that conference. And that schedule. When you face Florida State, Texas, LSU, Georgia, Miami in a month-and-a-half span, excuse me for saying that it's not created equally.
I think that the opposite is probably more likely to happen, that if they do expand to 9, that there are going to be other conferences that get the benefit of the doubt.
I agree with that.
And to push back on your point slightly on the fact that if you've got a 9-win SEC team and a 10-win Big Ten team that plays an easier schedule, we have to pay attention to if a team like Michigan goes 10-2 and they smoke, like blow out 20 plus points, all of their non-top 25 opponents that are in the conference.
They blow out Northwestern.
That's still going to be perceived as more impressive if we're just talking like data points, if we're just talking about all those things. That's it's hard to beat a team by 20 plus points.
Not Northwestern, it's not. Let me ask you.
But it'd be Maryland and the mid-level teams and Purdue.
Okay. Which Michigan did last year, is Michigan beating Maryland by 17 points more impressive than Florida on the road losing to Florida State by 3 or 10?
Well, if I watched both of those teams play, I feel like we knew for a fact that even if Michigan wasn't playing, that this was the whole debate that we kept having. Even though we knew Michigan wasn't playing as difficult of a schedule, we could tangibly sit and watch the games and know, this team can win a national title.
It's the argument you and I had about Alabama, right? In reference to, meaning Alabama last year getting in the playoff over Florida State. Here's the truth. All right, I'm ready to be canceled by Florida State fans. They're driving me nuts. Why did Alabama truly get into the playoff? Jordan Travis did have a big deal to do with it. I'm not going to say it didn't.
Okay.
But let's not act like that.
That had most of it to do with it. That had like 90% of it to do with it, because the rest of it was understandable that they were good enough to be there.
Very fair. Very fair. Let's not act like Alabama didn't go through a more brutal schedule than Florida State did. And if we're going to sit here, that is the argument that
but this is where we kind of this is where we always get off track with this shit.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. Getting back to the main point, this is why Saban was against it. This is why Kentucky was against it. This is why Kirby was against it originally. Because you have to go to Nick and say, hey, we added Texas. Now, Nick's not here, clearly, but we're adding another top 10 opponent. And Nick, and let me ask you, why did Nick literally fight this the entire way? Why?
Because he knows specifically out of any SEC program, they would always have one of the top 5 hardest schedules in the country. They always would have one because of their consistent rivals of who they play.
Correct. And so to him, let's just say hypothetically, he did not retire this year. Joe, he's got Florida. I mean, he's got Georgia again. They don't care. They're about generating revenue. And the question becomes, when's Georgia going to go to Kyle Field? Oh, by the way, they've never been there. So
Look,
I understand.
okay, but the conversation isn't who's playing. To go back to what you just brought up a second ago, the conversation is never about who's playing the harder schedule. It's who's the better team. Our eyeballs can see these things, and it's the whole freaking thing that we got yelling about each other is that being an eyeball guy over a resume guy.
But what are you going to do when Texas gets Vanderbilt when they go to a 9-game conference schedule?
That doesn't mean anything. I don't understand why.
Oh, okay, so it doesn't matter. That's what you're telling me. You already know what you know about Texas. It's not it. I get no. This is why most fans want to go to 9 because you get to play other teams. You get to go other places. I understand that. I'm not saying I disagree with the 9-game schedule, Joe. I'm not. I understand their argument. I understand when Mark Stoops and Nick Saban stand up at the podium and say, okay, cool, but it's not, our schedules are not created equally. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. I'm not disagreeing with that part of it. I just don't.
I just think it's
kind of stupid. I just think it's
non-conference games. And
I don't think that it would hurt. I don't think that they need to.
I think it's funny
that
they now want to go to it because money's involved.
Yeah, and Sankey said in that article that apparently, we don't make all of our decisions based off of money, but
yeah, he does.
Yes, exactly.
He does.
I almost pulled that to bring that up. I'm like, that was such a BS quote that he had.
Can I give you a hot take? I know this is going to get us in hot water. Can I give you a hot take?
What?
Has Sankey kind of taken a step back? I've really questioned some of the decisions he's made.
Yeah. I mean, I don't feel as confident about him as I usually do this offseason.
I don't either. That man's making all but you know why? You know why this is happening?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the same. It's the same thing with who's the Big Ten commissioner? Tony Petitti. Both of them are making money decisions because their revenue gets paid off of money generated.
Yes.
No wonder they're making these decisions.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's just the natural way things are flowing. Is that our decision making and our perception of these guys is going to progressively get worse and worse? Because I do think we eventually get to a point where we perceive them like we do Roger Goodell, where we hold them a little bit of a grudge against them because Roger Goodell's a great commissioner and he makes great decisions.
I agree,
but hold a lot of things against him.
Back on McAfee a month ago because what he said, a 18-game schedule. Remember?
Yeah.
Right. And it's about revenue. The issue though becomes, for me at least, and I agree with Lane Gabriel here. He says, in one of those losses in the SEC to top 10 teams could keep them out of a playoff, but 11-0 Ohio State gets in. I'll take it a step differently and say, you know who would have gotten in? Hey, let me ask you this question.
That's a bad comment.
Hold on. No. Let me ask you this God's honest question. Who was the better team, LSU this year or Penn State?
I mean, I don't know. I don't think that's like a cut and dry black and white answer.
But
I don't think that it is.
Because
one team was much better defensively, one was obviously a million years better offensively.
Fair. But Penn State went 10-2 with a far less worse schedule than what LSU did. Far less.
Yeah, but they had close losses. This is a good example. They dominated and blew out every bad team in the Big Ten that they played.
So did LSU.
The 2 losses were close.
LSU blew out every bad team that they played too. That's not. What's the excuse when LSU does it? And I'm giving an example so people don't freak out.
Okay.
So if LSU blows out all the bad teams that they played, then what? When they blew out Mississippi State,
but I am not knocking LSU. I'm trying to prop up Penn State to say that their only losses last year were against the 2 toughest opponents that they had were 2 of the best teams in the country.
LSU's 3 losses were against their 3 toughest opponents. 2 that should have been a playoff team.
I mean, and it also, what was the score of the bowl game that Penn State played in?
They got beat by Ole Miss. To my point, one of LSU's losses.
They were missing most
Drew
of the
Aller didn't throw for like 50% completion percentage. LSU beats Penn State. They got blown out by Ole Miss. Ole Miss,
wait. The Ole Miss game, though, that they were
Yeah,
missing a number of the guys that got the defensive and offensive guys that got drafted really early last year. So, like, I don't think it's like, I don't like using the bowl
Lane
games. I
Kiffin
don't
pulled his
like using the bowl
pants down
games.
and took a dump on James Franklin's chest.
Thanks for that graphic detail.
Speaking of James Franklin.
Yeah, that whole situation is I really don't feel like talking about that because it's just so dumb because I don't think he's a very good guy. I've said that multiple times. People I've talked to close to Penn State have said that to me multiple times.
Oh, 100%. All right, you want to wrap this up with this?
I don't know if we got time to get to that because I got to get to another show in 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, I guess what today we figured out. Can I be honest with you? Let me end it here. I would not hate if they kept it at 8 games in the SEC.
No, I don't think that there's no right or wrong answer with it. I don't think that. And then where you and I end up fighting is what resume looks better in a lot of these conversations. And I don't think that there's a right or a wrong answer.
Oh, I do think there's a right and wrong answer.
I think that there needs to be deep, long conversations when comparing two teams. That's where I stand. I don't think it's this team's better. Just boom.
Well, why don't we put it to a vote? You see, here's the question that I've had. Okay, and this is what they've been doing. They've been putting it to a vote, and it's been getting killed. Like, so now there's 16 teams, right? It legitimately has been getting killed every single time that they vote on it. Now that they have money, Sankey's probably going to step in and say, you're going to do this.
Right.
Let the teams vote if they want to do it or not. It doesn't.
I think most of them would vote because, like, a team like Alabama, or a team like Alabama or Georgia, there's probably not much more money for them to make that's like going to make a difference for them in the team that they can build and the quality of the program that they're going to have because they're already at an elite level. But a team like, let's say, Mississippi State or a team like, Missouri or Ole Miss that don't have like long-standing consistent success are going to say probably yes to something like that because it means more money that funnels into their program. I think most athletic directors would say yes to this. Most coaches would say no. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.